Hey Young Turks, this is Nomiki here from New York, back home after a very long set of weeks of DNC forums where I was covering the DNC elections. So I have some updates for you. The election took place for all of the officers of the Democratic Party on Saturday, February 22nd. That was about 5 days ago. Since then, I've been working on a story, also recovering from an upper respiratory infection. So there's that. The story is about the DNC vote. Now, for those of you who are watching me report on the day of the election and were checking out my Twitter page, you would know that I reported on a problem in the voting in which the Democratic National Committee had not followed its own bylaws. Now, the bylaws for the Democratic Party very clearly say that in this election, these bylaws were voted on by a group of individuals on a rules committee of sorts, so that these are the laws that were put in place for the elections. And they're intentional, they're set that way for a very specific spirit of the law, not a literal sense of the law, but really for a couple of goals. Number one, it is prohibited that the voting is done on secret ballots. Now, we in America know what it's like not to have a secret ballot. People go into their voting booths. They, sometimes have to sign or have to present their IDs depending on the state, but they have to prove that they are, or make a statement that they are who they represent. And then they go into the booth and then they vote. So that is not a secret ballot, that's a tallied ballot. Now, what the DNC did that day was they tallied the ballots and then released the number totals to the public. But that is not what they said that they were going to do. When they had a call with the press on the Thursday before the vote, they had told the press that they were going to record all of the votes and that it could come down to one of two different types of voting processes. Either an electronic vote with it's a barcode on it that's assigned for each voter, each DNC member, and then that vote goes on the screen with the person's name, or a paper ballot, which would the DNC member would sign their name and put their name on it, but that the vote would be recorded. Now, based on my interviews with members from different campaigns, not just the chairs, but the vice chairs, the secretaries, the treasurer, there was a whole slew of different candidates for office. What I've learned from several members of different campaigns is that they built their operations on having access to these public votes, the recorded votes, meaning the DNC member, knowing which DNC member voted for which candidate between the ballots. Because if the candidate was not elected on the first ballot, then they'd have to go to the second ballot, and that's when the campaigns would scramble to try to whip the remaining votes so they wait on the second ballot. Except the DNC never released those votes. The DNC was fully aware that several of the campaigns had whip operations taking place. They had data teams. They had paid people to work in between those ballots. Now let's use the chair candidates just because you guys know who they are. You're most familiar with them. Tom Perez did not win on the first ballot. He ended up winning on the second ballot. But between those votes, there were about 20 DNC members who did not vote on the first ballot, but did vote on the second ballot. Now, if those 20 members did not show up, what our numbers were showing was that Sally Boynton Brown's 12 votes were probably going to go to Keith Ellison. That's what her campaign told us. That's what the Ellison campaign told us, and other campaigns told us. His numbers did not budge above 200. So either he lost votes from his own people, or and gained Sally Boynton Brown's votes, or it just didn't, or Tom Perez won Sally Boynton Brown's votes, or maybe a mix of both. But you don't know that unless you see who voted for whom. Now, the DNC has come back to me with several different explanations as to why it went down this way. Now, in the room, because I contacted them in between the votes and said, you said that they were going to be recorded, now you're saying they're not going to be recorded. How do we know? And they said, well, recording means tallied. That's what they initially said. I said, no, it's in your bylaws. And I attached the bylaws to the email, and I said, in your bylaws that these votes are not to be secret. And then I explained that tallies are secret ballots if you don't announce who voted for whom. And then they got back to me and said, well, it would take too much time to go through all these votes, because if you add up all the different candidates and the different ballots, it would be over 1,000 votes. My response was, maybe you shouldn't have spent 3 hours having people give speeches. You should have had people vote first and then give the speeches while you counted the votes. But that's just me. Then they said, okay, we're going to release the votes in a couple of weeks to the National Archive, and anybody can go see them. Well, I do have an update. As of today, the DNC did say that they are going to give access to the candidates to go into the DNC and view the ballots, who voted for whom, but they have to go to the DNC in Washington starting Monday, and they cannot record it. They can't take pictures. So if a candidate or a campaign really is curious, it's going to take them several hours, possibly several days, to actually sit there and tally up with several people how the votes worked. Now, this is the Democratic Party's, what they called the most transparent election ever in their history. Now, I'm asking a lot of questions about this because it's not really an opinion, it's just looking at the way that the bylaws are written, that the bylaws were not followed. And so my question is, what does the DNC do now? Now, none of the candidates are going to go back and say, recount, revote, we don't think Tom Perez is the chair, we don't think any of these other people were actually elected. I'm not hearing that from any campaign. What I'm hearing are two things. Number one, this is a Democratic Party that had a lot of rebranding to do. They lost the trust of a lot of voters. Tom Perez himself had said that the system was rigged, and then he went back on that statement later, but he himself had said that. So for a party that has been facing this type of problem over the past year and needed to renew the trust and called this the most transparent election in a lifetime, for them to not be able to conduct a very simple vote of 440 members and not be prepared when they've been preparing for 4 months for the two alternatives that they had given us, paper or electronic ballot, is a little confusing. One more thing I learned is that the Democratic Party told the candidates that they were changing the strategy and not recording votes 1 hour before the vote. As one individual from a campaign told me, one of the chair's campaigns, they said to me, that's like if the Super Bowl decided 1 hour before the Super Bowl that they were getting rid of the coin toss, and then told the teams 1 hour before. So, this is a party that has to do a lot of work to renew the faith of its members. The second thing that the DNC candidates and campaigns and members have been frustrated about that I've interviewed is that most DNC members, over 200 DNC members, were elected by voters. About 70 or so were actually just appointed as at-large members, and then the remaining are elected by organizations. So the constituencies of these DNC members would like to know where their DNC members voted. Partly because some of the DNC members probably publicly said they were voting for someone and they want to hold them accountable and there to be transparency, but also I think that some folks actually want to know who they should challenge the next time around, because this was an insider game, but this was also supposed to be the most transparent election ever in the history of the Democratic Party. I'm working on a story, it should be out tomorrow, with a little bit more details about what has gone on with the DNC, what people are feeling, what people are thinking, what DNC members are thinking at this time. But, there have been a lot of different answers from the DNC communications team. They have been responsive, I have to say that. They've been very responsive. Some DNC candidates have said, well, the DNC is just hasn't been capable. They haven't had the staffing to really handle this vote. I don't know if that's really an excuse. That's not for me to say, but this Democratic Party has been planning this for several months, and they do have a staff and they do have resources, as we know. So I don't know how much I appreciate that. I did talk to a union leader who said that they run union elections all the time, and this would never be acceptable. This is the party that has more money, and they have a lot to do to renew the faith of its members, and it seemed, and this is my observation, that they were delaying the vote all day and then rushing the vote. And there's a lot of convenient excuses like, we don't want to have cameras come into the DNC to photograph who voted for what because there are signatures on the ballot and that could create fraud. Come on. Like, what is this, Nicaragua? There's a lot of responses that have you wondering, Now, this isn't conspiracy theory. Anybody who's worked in party politics, as I have, knows that there are tactics to try to control the vote, especially when you're trying to display a transparent vote. That could be limiting speeches, that could be limiting voting time, that could be rushing votes, that could be using delay tactics. I've been a part of Democratic Party clubs when I was a kid and my parents were involved in politics, and that's the oldest trick in the book. Delay, delay, delay. Make the people tired so that they don't want to be there and they just want to rush through it. Because when you rush through it, you don't notice details. Another thing that I have heard is that the Democratic Party has stated to members, and I don't know this, but this is from a member's account, that if you had a problem, you should have mentioned it at the moment. And of course, when they're rushing through, a lot of times you don't realize what's going on. So looking forward to sharing my report with you. That is my latest update. The Democratic Party had its votes on Saturday, and there is new leadership at the DNC. There's questions over the bylaws and whether or not they were followed. Of course, the fact that they changed the whole procedure 1 hour before the elections. And let's not forget that these campaigns had been working with the DNC and discussed what the procedures were going to be on the day of the vote. And the DNC knew very well that some of these candidates had hired data teams to run the numbers and to run out there and whip votes. And in between the ballots, these candidates just had to trust what DNC members were saying as to who they were voting for with no accountability. And of course, DNC members, not always reliable. They weren't always saying who they were actually going to vote for. One more thing to note, before I forget, this was reported on yesterday in Politico, that it was reported on Politico that President Obama and Vice President Biden were not just giving calls to DNC members, but they were giving calls in between the votes. So I don't know if they were just calling some members that they knew were able to flip, or if they actually had access. I mean, that's a question that I think deserves being asked. Who had access to the information in between the votes? Who are the people overseeing this? These are questions that need to be asked. And of course, this was billed as the most transparent election that the DNC has had in history. All right, guys, thank you so much. I'm Nomiki, following up shortly with more information. As always, thank you. Good night.